Welcome to our HR Club. It's lovely to be joined by so many of you. My name's Caitlin Anniss and I'm here from Narrow Quay HR, which is the HR consultancy which forms part of the VWV family of companies. Many of you will have attended our HR clubs in the past and will know them as smaller in-person events. They're regional, based around our Bristol office. And running remote sessions has allowed us to alter the format slightly and invite a larger group from across the country. And we thought that this was particularly helpful for our session today. I'm joined today by Graham Mitchell, who's our guest speaker, and Graham is a business psychologist. I'm also joined by Gareth Edwards, who heads up the employment team at VWV, and Sarah Martin, who's also from Narrow Quay HR. Before we start the session, I just wanted to let you know about our next HR Club, which is taking place on the 10th of December. It's going to be a redundancy masterclass. We will have someone from the VWV employment team taking us through the legal aspects of redundancy, and Narrow Quay HR will be tackling the practical issues and looking at some of the tricky areas where things can go wrong, particularly around the consultation process. Invites will be sent out nearer the time and it would be lovely to see you there. We're also running a session in January on discrimination and unconscious bias. This is taking place on the 14th of January and will be a practical session outlining the provisions of the Equality Act and looking at unconscious bias and how it can have an impact on your workplace. This is a very topical issue currently and will be a great session for any of your staff who you think could benefit from some training around on unconscious bias or a refresher. I also just wanted to let you know about some sessions that the employment team at VWV are running. They are going to be running fortnightly webinars on a Wednesday, starting on the 30th of September. They will be around 30 minutes on a topical issue. And the first one is around adapting to the new normal in the post-COVID workplace, looking at planning around getting workforces back, thinking about COVID secure workplaces, and responding to outbreaks. Graham, could you just move me on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So just very briefly, what are we going to cover today? So I'm going to give you a very short introduction, just giving a little bit of context in terms of what's brought us to this point. I'm then going to hand over to Graham, who will talk about how to thrive in the new normal. And we will then have the Q&A session where you can put questions to Graham, myself, Gareth and Sarah. And as Rory has said, please feel free to start writing those questions in the Q&A box as we go through the session. Graham, could you move me on to the next slide, please? So a brief look in terms of what has brought us to this point. In early spring, it was clear that something called COVID-19 was going to have an impact on our daily lives. On the 23rd of March, the nation was told to stay at home, only leaving the house for food, for our daily exercise and work, but only if that was absolutely necessary. The week before, we'd seen pubs, clubs and other social venues closed, all non-essential shops shut, and great swathes of the UK moved to working at home. Schools had closed the previous week, and so those home workers quickly had to adapt to working at the kitchen table, often alongside their partners and homeschooled children. We had entered the lockdown. The furlough scheme was announced on the 26th of March, entitling eligible employees to be furloughed from work and receive 80% of their earnings. Employers, employment lawyers, HR consultants all had to get their heads around that scheme in super quick time. In mid-May, the lockdown started to be eased a little, and employees who were unable to work from home were urged to return to work. The lockdown easing has continued, with shops, pubs and social venues reopening gradually. The furlough scheme also changed, with part-time and flexible furlough being allowed from the 1st of July, and employers having to contribute to the scheme in the run-up to the closure at the end of October. In August, the government moved from recommending home working to allowing employers to use their discretion to enable staff to return to work, provided they follow the relevant guidelines for their sector. A key government objective is for employers to ensure that workplaces are safe, whilst also enabling working from home. This leaves employers with huge logistical challenges in many cases, alongside additional concerns such as employees who may have been shielding, those who can't work their full hours because of childcare constraints, and quarantine arrangements for people returning home from a number of countries. The CIPD suggests that 3 tests should be considered by employers. Is it essential that staff return to the workplace? Is it safe? And is it mutually agreed? We're working with clients who are considering a range of options for their staff. Some workplaces have, of course, been open throughout the lockdown period and continue to be open as usual with various measures in place to ensure the safety of their staff. Other employers have decided to keep their staff working from home until later in the year or even into next year. Many are considering a gradual return of some staff to the workplace, which is likely to result in workplaces where some staff are working in the office at least some of the time and others remain working at home. We've been working with our clients throughout the lockdown period and beyond as they try to work out the best options for their businesses, whether that's been utilising the furlough scheme or working out how to get their staff back into workplaces safely, and more recently, working with organisations who are having to reorganise or consider redundancies. Many businesses are reviewing how they work, given the changes that they have had to make, and considering whether newer or more flexible ways of working may benefit both them and their staff. What's clear to us now is that the impact of COVID-19 is not going to be short-lived or neatly tied up within a matter of months, as we first hoped. We're having to learn to live with the impact of the pandemic in both our personal lives and our working lives. And I'm going to hand over Graham now to take you through the rest of the session.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you very, very much. And well, good morning, everybody. As Caitlin's just mentioned, my name's Graham Mitchell. I'm a business psychologist, and as you can see from the screen, I run a consultancy called T2I Business Performance Psychology. And I've been asked to just come along today and present for 20, maybe 25 minutes on the value of enhancing employee engagement at this moment in time, and in particular the role that leaders and leadership can play in allowing organisations to do so. And I have to be honest, I think this is a great topic to be covering. I'm a business psychologist, so I'd probably tell you that engagement is a key topic at any time. But I think it's particularly relevant right now, given the vital role that engagement can play in allowing us as organisations and enabling us as organisations to build back performance and thrive in this new normal. What is it that makes me think that it's got such a vital role to play? Well, that's what I want to cover off in the first half of today's presentation. And I want to establish the case for engagement in a way by looking at 2 key areas. Firstly, what I want to take us all back to is what engagement actually is. This might seem like an obvious start point and something I'm sure we're all fairly familiar with. But in my experience, we don't always get it 100% right. And that can sometimes detract from the impact of our overall engagement strategy. The second area I then want to look at is the wide-ranging impacts and benefits that we can get from engagement if we get it right, and why I think they're particularly relevant right now. Having hopefully made a case for engagement, what I'd like to do in the second half of the presentation is come on to look at some of the ways that we can build it in our organisations, and as I say, in particular the role that leaders and leadership can play. In terms of format for today, I like to keep the sessions that I do informal and interactive, which is a very early and open invitation for me to say, please do get involved. I know it might not be as easy as usual given the format that we're sort of operating on and the numbers that are involved, but I will be stopping at various points just to review what I've discussed, and as mentioned, there'll be a big Q&A at the end. So please do post your comments, your questions, your thoughts and ideas as we go along. And what I don't cover as we go through, hopefully we can pick up on at the end. And as a start point for that, and just to get the grey matter going whilst the caffeine kicks in, and to start to get you thinking about how some of the general principles that I'll mention today might translate into the specific circumstances that you find yourselves in. What I want you to consider is what are the challenges that your organisation is facing right now, or may face in the weeks, months, as Caitlin's mentioned, maybe even years to come. What are the outcomes that you're working towards at this moment in time? What are those milestone markers that you think are going to help signify that you're building back performance and thriving in the new normal? What are the qualities that you want your people to be displaying in order to allow you to achieve these objectives? And just keep those in mind as we go through today's presentation. So hopefully what it will do is it'll point out to you areas where we're being successful already and we're achieving these things, but maybe even point out one or two other areas where there's some ideas that you can add in that can help you be even better still. Okay, so that's what I want to cover today. As I say, what I want to do first of all is really just make the case for engagement at any particular time. And the way that I wanted to do that is to come back to just discussing what engagement actually is. Now, as I'm sure many of you will be well aware, engagement is not an exact science in that regard. So there's no one set definition that we should all really be working to. But one that I always come back to is this particular one, which some of you may have seen before. And what it sets out is that engagement is the processes and practices by which we encourage our employees to freely and willingly release discretionary effort towards organizational objectives. So why is it that I always come back to this one? Well, for me, it's because this definition highlights what I think are three key areas that we need to be aware of if we're actually going to generate effective engagement. The first of those is that it talks about processes and practices. So very early on, it introduces us to the fact that if we're going to look to build engagement in our organizations, it's not just about what we do, it's also about how we do it. And we need to have those two dimensions in mind right from the very start. The second is it also introduces this quality of discretionary effort that we're trying to encourage our employees to freely and willingly release. Now, discretionary effort is the payoff that we get from our people by engaging them through the processes and practices. It's the mythical extra mile that we hear about so many times, and what we want to try and generate from our people by shifting their mindset from one of almost what I have to give you because I signed a contract somewhere that says that, to all that I have to give you because I'm bought into what we're doing around here and I want to make my contribution. But it's the final one for me that perhaps is the most important one, and that's the last three words: towards organizational objectives. Because when we're putting these processes and practices in place that we hope will generate and release this discretionary effort and get our people walking that extra mile, we don't really want them to just be walking any extra mile. We'd ideally like them to all be walking an extra mile in the same direction, and actually for that direction to be what we're trying to achieve as an organization. So I think those last three words just serve as a timely reminder that employee engagement isn't necessarily just about a feel-good factor at an individual level. It's about an overall performance factor at an organizational level. And that's why I feel it's so important at any given time. Because if we think about our organizations, every individual in them holds discretionary effort. And so if we can tap into that, just even at least a small percentage by enhancing engagement, that's a lot of extra mileage that we have in our business that we can tap into, and a lot of additional performance that we can unlock. And I wonder whether now's a good point, having spoken for a few minutes, just to see, I don't know, Sarah, if there's any questions or comments come in. Is there any points that you're thinking of at all?
No, and I suppose you might come on to this, but one thing I was thinking about as you were talking is you're making the case for employee engagement, and I was thinking, where you've seen businesses that have got sort of poor employee engagement, do you see any sort of common themes coming through?
There are some common themes, and you're absolutely right. I'll come on to it later on if I may, because I think there are some key things when we start to look at how we build engagement in our organisations, both in terms of what we do and how we do it. I think there are some principles there that if you adhere to them, you give yourself a good chance to do it, and if you don't, then you run the risk that perhaps your engagement won't be as effective as you can do. So if I may, I'll refer back to that later on, because I think it's a really valid question and one that will be a good takeaway from today's session. Okay, so as I say, what I wanted to do by looking back at this definition was just set out why engagement, I think, is particularly relevant and important for organisations at any time. And this is because of the sort of the magnitude, because of the sort of size of impact that it can have. But what I also wanted to set up was why it was particularly relevant right now. And in order to do that, what we need to do is not necessarily just look at the size of the impact it can have on performance, but the way in that those impacts on performance can manifest. Right at the start, I said, have a think as we go through. Think about the challenges that you're facing. Think about the outcomes that you're looking to achieve, or think about the qualities that you want your people to display as we're trying to thrive in the new normal and find these new ways of working. And what I want you to do now, just keep those in mind as I start to go through some of the benefits that employee engagement could unlock, and just start to see how they maybe start to tick off what you're looking for out of your people, and almost create the case in your organisation for engagement. Because when I asked you to consider what outcomes we were working to, I'd be surprised if some of you didn't think straight away, well, one area where we have to build back is in terms of financial performance. And it's probably not a surprise to anybody that if we're engaging our people, it does have a marked impact on both profitability and productivity. And I think that's a really interesting combination, because what we're looking at there is not just that headline figure of profitability, but also a sort of an efficiency figure in a way with productivity. It's a measure of, not just the buck that we get, but also the bang for our buck. And at this moment in time where there's so much to do and only so many hours in the day, the fact that we're not just delivering magnitude of performance, but also being efficient in the way that we do it, is a useful combination that engagement can help us with. But we're also talking constantly about new ways of working, both internally and the way in which we deliver to our clients. And that's a key outcome, I'd imagine, for many of you as well. So again, if we're making the case for engagement, it's interesting to note that it does have a marked impact on innovation. So if we're engaging our people, they're far more likely to be thinking about the new ways that they can operate and thinking about the new ways that they can deliver to their clients, given the changed circumstances that they're in. But engagement, again, is a bit more wide-ranging. It doesn't just look at the headline profitability. It doesn't just look at the sort of practical processes. It also focuses on that really key other element. It focuses on people. It's been a very tough 6 months for everybody. And I challenge anyone to say that, at some stage, maybe their well-being hasn't been challenged. So it's very good to note that engagement will help us build back there. If we're engaging our people in the workplace, we're going to build their well-being, not just in the workplace, but how that then floods out into other areas of their life. And that's an absolutely key ingredient in making sure that their performance isn't just at the level that we want, but it's sustainable as well. Not surprisingly, if people feel their well-being is their work life is rewarding, they don't want to stay where they are. So we're actually going to make sure that we're retaining our employees as well and adding to our recruiter brand. And if we now look at those 5 factors in combination, if we're being successful in what we do and efficient in what we do, if we're constantly thinking about the new ways we can deliver to our clients, and we've got a settled and motivated workforce who are delivering it, it's no surprise that it then filters down to another important band of people, which is our customers and customer satisfaction. And if you look at it, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy from here on in, because if our customers are satisfied, whatever trade is out there will come back to us. So our profitability, our productivity, our innovation all starts to get an extra boost as well. And this for me is why engagement is so important right now. Because as we enter the new normal, we're all being challenged to build back performance and try and find ways to thrive. But the hits that we've taken over the last 6 months haven't just been commercial. We've experienced hits on our cultural front, and we've had experienced hits in relation to our clients on our client bases as well. And the key about engagement, as I say, is not just that it impacts performance, it impacts a wide range of performance measures, and it'll allow us to build back on all 3 of the fronts that we mentioned before. So if we're managing to build back our engagement and enhance that, it's going to give us the best possible chance to build back performance on all the fronts that we need to and thrive in the new normal. Any comments at all at this stage? Or
Hi, Graham. Yeah, we've had a question from one of the delegates who asks, she says, discretionary effort resonates for me, particularly in the context of the pandemic. What needs to be explored is, how do we experience discretionary effort? Is it working longer hours? Is it offering to support colleagues? What does it look like?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, in a way, discretionary effort can take many forms, and I'm cautious that some of the time, yes, that can be working longer hours to make sure that the project gets done. But I think we have to be careful there. One of the things I always say is, with any performance that we look to generate, it needs to be sustainable. We need to be able to perform in a way today that we can come back and do it again tomorrow. And yes, every now and then we have to put a shoulder to the grindstone to deliver on a particular project, but there has to be quite a defined timescale. So I think it really, I suppose the easiest way of doing it is it's stuff that feeds into the overall purpose of your organisation, whether that's on a cultural or a performance front. So sometimes it will be about working longer hours to get a particular project done. Sometimes it will be about, you know, being more innovative because you understand that we want to deliver something. Our current ways don't deliver that. So, you know, it's almost having the motivation to try and find new ways and not settle until you do it. Some of the times it can be taking the time to catch up with a colleague who you just know it's not quite right today, so you're feeding into the cultural aspects of what you're doing as well. So it can manifest in many ways, but I suppose it's the easy way sometimes to summarize it is that beyond contract work that we do. So it's the stuff I don't have to do it, but it's just part of what we do around here, either in terms of what we might deliver as an organization or the way that we operate as a culture. And so I want to do it because, you know, I would hope somebody would do the same for me. Hopefully that's answered the question. Please ask them to comment back or please do comment back if that's it. Anything else whilst we're just talking about the areas of performance with engagement?
Graham, something I was just thinking about then in terms of the discretionary effort and what it might look like is something that you and I have spoken about previously, which are particular challenges around staff working from home, and the sort of border between home and work, and how if discretionary effort might look like working additional hours to get things done, sometimes those boundaries can be quite blurred in terms of people working at home, and therefore it being easier to just sit down at the laptop and just do that extra bit. And so I think it's quite important, isn't it, to perhaps be working with staff, particularly if that home working is going on for a longer period of time, to be thinking about what those boundaries and expectations are and make sure that there isn't a negative impact on well-being because of perhaps those blurred boundaries.
Ken, I think that's absolutely right. It sort of is why I took a second when someone was talking about additional performance, because it is a measure, but you do have to guard against it. And interesting, when we all started to go into lockdown and working from home, IT departments all over the world will curse me, but I actually sort of mentioned that in a way, the IT, the technology would be the simplest part of what we do, and our working practices and being sustainable both commercially and culturally and operationally would be more of a challenge. And one of the issues around that is how do we replicate the experience people have in the office environment to the home environment? And that is a lot of that is about the structure to their day, and it's an individual experience. And interestingly, if you look at the studies, it is as much of a challenge about, are my people engaged when they're working from home? It's almost, are they overworking? Are they overcompensating? Because no one can, you know, I can't see anybody leave the office at whatever time to prompt me to think maybe that's it for today. You know, no one can see me, so I feel guilty sometimes getting up from my desk. And we really therefore need to make sure with our people as we drop into this, that one area we cover is working patterns and working to objectives. What needs to be done? When are we going to do this? When are we not going to do this? And just make sure that we are creating those boundaries between the office and the home. So that as I come back to the point I mentioned with Sarah, any work patterns we get into are sustainable. And that's absolutely key. So I think they have got blurred, and it's absolutely key, therefore, that we're saying, look, we might not all have the same working patterns. There is a flexibility there for us to sometimes work to something that suits us a little bit better, provided we can deliver into the whole. But there's just that opportunity to make sure that you have a pattern, and that pattern is sustainable, and that line managers are, you know, they're monitoring that. They're making sure that people are delivering what they need to, but also they're getting what they need to away from the office as well. Okay, thank you for those. And as I say, if there are questions or comments as we go along, I do think it breaks it up nicely. So please do throw them in. So hopefully what I've done over the first half is establish the case for employee engagement, not just in general, because there is this huge potential within organisations that we can unlock if we can tap into it by raising engagement and release discretionary effort. But also because when we do release that effort, it can manifest in so many positive ways that are relevant at any time, but I think particularly relevant right now, as you can see from the outcomes that are up on screen. All of which neatly brings us to the million-dollar question, which is if we're bought into this, and hopefully you are, what can we do to enhance engagement, and how can we start to unlock that potential? Well, sadly, there is no single set answer. It's not that simple. I'm conscious that on today's call, we've got people from organisations of kind of many shapes, sectors and sizes, and I'd love to be able to sit here and give you one thing that if you all did, it would work for all of you, but it's not quite that straightforward. And in many ways, I suppose the challenge and the value of engagement is that it's almost for every organisation to make sense of it for themselves within their own four walls, the objectives and outcomes and vision that they're working to, and the culture that they want to foster in their people. But when I'm working with organisations to do just that, to try and make sense of engagement for them and build an engagement strategy, what I'll always ask them to focus on is two particular things, as I mentioned earlier on. The first is, what can we do? So what initiatives can we implement? What processes can we put in place? And I'll come on to share some ideas around that later on. But the first thing that I wanted to look at, because it does feed into the leadership element of today, is how can we do it? How can we interact with our people when we're designing and developing some of these initiatives? Or how can we behave when we're delivering them that's really going to breathe life into them in the right way and is going to engage our people? Because there are some core principles that if leaders observe, it will help them to enhance engagement, particularly in the climate that we find ourselves in right now. The first of these is whatever initiative you're putting in place, whether it's a discrete initiative around a particular team or something that's organisation-wide, have a clear and compelling vision and a sound strategy. We're at a time at the moment where there is a lot of uncertainty. And what we can find with that is it can create anxiety, and that can make us hold back from committing to all sorts of things. So whatever you're doing, in whatever way you're trying to move your organisation forward, try and provide the people involved with as much clarity and certainty as possible as to where you're trying to get to and how you're going to get there. Build confidence that what we're doing here is part of a bigger, coherent plan, not just a single discrete idea, no matter how well intentioned that might be. The second pillar, and it may seem like an obvious one, was that if we want engaged people, let's make sure we've got a network of engaging leaders. Let's make sure we've got a network of leaders who see their people as individuals and try to engage with them on both a personal and a professional level. As we've just mentioned, it's difficult at the moment because we are that little bit more remote and there's so many competing priorities on our day. But it's really important that all of us, but particularly our leaders, take time for their individuals. So it's important where we set out the vision and strategy in pillar one, that we take the time to let our people know how they connect to that, how the individual effort that they put in day to day is part of that bigger picture. It's important to take time where we're setting out new ways of working to make sure we equip those people with the skills that they'll need to deliver that new way of working, so they feel confident they can thrive in the new normal. And it's important to take time where we know well-being's taken a hit to assure them that we've got their best interests at heart and focus on well-being as a priority so that they know that they're actually seen as a person as well as an employee. And the more that we do that, the more that we are engaging with our people, the more our people will reflect that back and engage with us. The third column is always an interesting one to raise, and it's around stakeholder voice. These are very challenging times right now, and I think almost every organisation is facing challenges and facing problems to solve. And stakeholder voice is really an exercise in making sure, in terms of our mindset, that we're seeing our people very much as part of the solution and not part of the problem, as sometimes we can do. Now, the reason stakeholder voice can sometimes be an interesting one when talking to leadership teams is they can hear the word voice, but then, sorry, I say the word voice, but they hear the word veto. Are we in some way, by giving people a voice, loosening our grip on things at a time when we need to have a firm hand on the tiller? And that's not what stakeholder voice is about. Voice is really about having meaningful dialogue with our people. It's about having a grown-up conversation with them about what we're trying to achieve and the challenges that we face in doing that. And then when decisions are made, it's about communicating to them why we're doing what we're doing, and sometimes equally as importantly, why we're not doing what we're not doing. So that whatever options or strategies that we land on in terms of how we want to progress, and in organisations of a particular size, it's rare that you'll get 100% agreement, but by building in the element of stakeholder voice, you'll gather as much momentum as you can do behind any initiative or any idea, and you'll give it the greatest possible chance of being a success and having a positive impact on your organisation. And the final leadership pillar to focus in on is cultural integrity. Whatever it is you're doing, make sure that the way in which you do it sits squarely in line with the way that we do things around here. We're at a time at the moment where there's so many things that we cannot control. But one thing over which we have absolute control every day is our behaviour. And it's important for all of us, but again, particularly for our leaders, that when we look at the values of our organisation, they're far more than just plaques on the wall. They're actually seen around the organisation day to day and role modelled by people who matter. It's important that culturally we're seen as an organisation that keeps its promises, or if it can't do on odd occasions, they're happy to sit down and talk about why that is. And as I said at the start, we look at what we can do to enhance engagement, but so much of it relies back on how we can do it. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, if you're looking at key areas we can focus on or key things that might drop away, these four are some key considerations that if we're setting out that vision and strategy, being the engaging leaders, giving stakeholder voice and acting with cultural integrity, we're always going to give any engagement initiative that we put in place a greater chance of success. This is always an interesting area, so I wonder if there's any comments at this point at all.
Graham, we had a comment about around sort of, I suppose, going back a little bit into looking at the working remotely and some of the challenges that we can see, particularly for businesses where that hasn't been the way they've worked previously.
Yeah.
And one of the comments was that engagement whilst working remotely, it can be seen by the effort that people are putting in and delivering what they need to. And as long as people are meeting their work objectives and giving that more thought, it's more valuable than working longer hours. And I think it's that thing, isn't it, around introducing an element of greater kind of flexibility and looking at things a little bit differently than you might have done in the past in terms of how you measure performance.
I think well, if I'm honest with you, I think in a way we should always measure performance like that. Performance is around outcomes, not processes in a way. So actually, as with many things with the way the world's been this year, in some circumstances it forces us to look at the world through better eyes. And I think in this instance, we may look around an office every day and assume that people are being productive just by their presence. Well, at the moment, we don't have those cues, and that's tricky for managers because it creates and can create anxiety there that they can't see their people, and it can tricky for people because it creates anxiety that their managers can't see them and what they're doing in a way. So I think with all of this, it is about setting very clear expectations that help you build trust. And the key thing with building trust is, well, what do we need to do as a team? What are each individual elements in that? When do we work separately? When do we work together? When do we need it done by? And that's the real judge in a way. But I would also say that what we need to do is, as well as look at that transactional performance or operational performance, do you keep one eye on that cultural performance? How do we pull together as a team in terms of just the goodwill, the collaboration, the innovation, just the cultural aspects as well, and place an emphasis on that. And absolutely, if we're looking at outputs, let's look at what people need to do, not just how long they're working, because ultimately that's what any organisation gets judged on. But just have one eye on that softer cultural side as well. Yeah,
I think that's really helpful. Thank you.
I'm not sure if there's anything more on the pillars at all, or we're okay to head on.
I think we're okay to head on at the moment. Thank you, Graham.
Okay. So as I say, when we're looking at engagement, there's really two big elements we can look at. There's how we do what we do, but there's also what can we do. And I know the main focus of today was maybe around leadership behaviours and how they'll how they can help us to enhance engagement. And hopefully that last screen has covered it. But what I also wanted to include today was just to leave you some practical considerations around engagement. Because I'm conscious that a lot of the time with engagement initiatives, we talk about sort of one-off engagement initiatives, one-off events, single hits that can and do impact positively. But sometimes they run the risk of maybe their impacts aren't enduring, and they're more shots in the arm or sugar lumps in a way than things that are going to impact our engagement every day moving forward. I'm also conscious that in the world that we're in at this moment in time, a number of those events aren't available to us. If we think about the events where we get a lot of people together and maybe do some work around the vision and the values, it's trickier to do them. So what I wanted to do, just the last element of today, is start to talk to you about some more practical areas that we can get involved in. Some of the things that we do day to day as part of our organizational development, as part of just our organizational existence. But if we can get that right and improve them, we're going to enhance engagement as well. Because at its core, so much of what engagement about relies on two things. It relies on clarity around the vision, and then it relies on instilling confidence in our individuals, in themselves, that they can deliver their part of that vision, and building confidence in our individuals in the organization that it's fit for purpose and it can deliver its share in the vision. And so when I'm talking with clients around areas that they consider where they might be able to build processes and practices that will help feed engagement, there are 6 that I focus on where we can maybe build confidence in those areas in order to build engagement and performance. And I just want to run through those now. Not surprisingly, the first element of the journey is what is our approach to talent acquisition and bringing people in. Now, some of us may be on a freeze at present whilst we're just taking stock of where we're set and how we move forward. But at some point, we'll start to bring people back into our organizations. And at some point, we'll look to build back and hopefully build back stronger and better than before. And so my advice here is, as we look towards the new normal and the challenges we face, bring people in light of those challenges. So yes, let's look at the ability that they have to deliver the role that we need them to, but also look beyond that. Have they got the appetite for the challenges that we face? And is their attitude aligned to our cultural values? Because if we're ticking all 3 of those boxes, we're almost recruiting engagement in, because they'll naturally flourish in the environment that they'll find themselves when they come on board. The second area I encourage people to look at is in learning and development. We spoke earlier about the fact that so many organizations are having to deliver to their clients in new ways, and therefore internally we're having to find new ways of doing things. If we're going to do that, absolutely key that we increase the confidence of our people to deliver in that new normal, that we're equipping them with the skills that's going to allow them to have confidence because they feel that they are competent in those areas. Now, development is often one of the first things that sadly takes a back seat when budgets get tighter. So we might need to be creative in terms of how we deliver that development. But I think it's absolutely key, if we're evolving the way that we do things, that we do whatever we can to help our people feel comfortable with the roles that they can do and confident that they can deliver them, because it will echo back to us. The third one is, if we're looking to engage our people, then it's probably because we want them to stay with us. But we've got to see the difference between them staying with us as an organization and sitting still, because we probably want one, but we don't want the other. Now, career progression at the moment for a lot of people, and career progression in its many guises, is probably a bit cloudier than it was 6 months ago. So I think it's really important that we try and re-establish for everybody what the future could look like for them, both in terms of the roles that they could take on board or the way they could just progress and evolve their skill set. So that all of a sudden they know that the future is there for them. They have a confidence that they have a future with the organization. But it's important to back that up with proper performance management, and therefore make sure that what we're doing here is providing timely and constructive feedback to help them on this journey of continuous improvement, and stepping away from some performance management systems, which can be seen around organizations as a bit of a 4-letter word. And these 3 first areas are really about how we can build confidence in the individual, in themselves, to deliver into the vision. The second 3 that I want to look at are all about how we can build confidence, that individual's confidence in the organization itself. The first one is, let's have a look at our organizational design and our infrastructure. So I sometimes refer to it as the hardware of our organizations. And this can be everything from the bricks and mortar we find ourselves in every day, the IT structures that we have in place, the functions that we have in terms of marketing or HR and IT. If we're claiming to be a world-class organization or market leading or aiming for a particular vision or goal, does our hardware keep that promise? Are there areas that we could refine it in that would increase confidence in those parts of our organization to support the efforts of our individuals? But it's also important to look at the organizational software as well, our core organizational capabilities. I've mentioned on a number of occasions today that we're in challenging times at the moment, and people want to feel that the organization that they're in can deal with those challenges. We're good at setting strategy. We're good at problem solving. We're good at managing challenges and conflict. And actually, as an organization, we look to navigate stormy times rather than just batten down the hatches and hopefully let it wash over us. we're more proactive, and we're therefore give a sense of security to the people that we know what we're doing and we know how we're looking to progress. And the final element to look at, not surprisingly, is our culture and our values, the point through which all of this flows. Culture is such an important asset for any organisation, and I think values are absolutely key right now. We find ourselves in uncertain times and often at a crossroads where there's no set right way to go, and our values can often guide us as to the right option that people in your organisation should be taking. So it's really important that those values are defined, that they're set out, that they're role modelled by the right individuals, and that the culture supports them rather than challenges them. And as I look at this set of potential organisational areas when I'm working with people, it's always, if we look at any one of these, then I'm sure that if we improve it, it will enhance engagement. If we look at them as a bundle, then I'm sure we'll enhance engagement even more. But what I ask them to do is to align the arrowhead. And what I mean by aligning the arrowhead is to go back to those 3 words in that definition that I mentioned earlier on. It's to think about towards organisational outcomes. Because what we're trying to do here is when we're looking at a good talent acquisition system or relevant development or a sound organisational infrastructure, what defines that is the purpose that we're trying to achieve. And that will be particular for every organisation and the outcomes that they want to deliver. So it's key that when we're looking at how we can improve in these areas, we look to align our people to our purpose, so that when we're generating that discretionary effort, we are getting them walking in roughly the same direction, and we are therefore starting to feed into the outcomes that we're looking for as an organisation, whether they're cultural or commercial. Just wanted to stop there again and just see if there's anything that people might think about in these areas. Are there initiatives that they put in place or comments they might have around any of those areas?
One of the comments is how can we use engagement to get staff back into the office? A lot of people can work remotely, but this business is moving towards a phase of getting back into the workplace. Have you got any advice around that?
I have, and I think that's, you know, it was mentioned earlier on in a way that somebody talked about that mutually agreed. So I think it was Caitlin was mentioning in terms of the process you were going down. You were talking about, is it essential, is it safe, is it mutually agreed? So I think with engagement, one of the ways that engagement will help us with getting people back into the office, and I've actually started to see it happen, is to start to look at giving people a voice in how we do that. And a good example I had it with where people were doing it on a team-by-team basis, where they were very balanced in what they looked at, and they said, okay, fine, what does this team need to deliver in the context of this overall organisation? How does this team operate day to day? And what are the concerns of each and every individual? And how can we make that work in terms of a balance between when we want to be back in the office, when people might want to work from home, that hopefully we respect what each individual needs or wants, but at the same time we deliver what the organisation needs. And I think this is absolutely key, where you look at that vision and say, okay, and what do we need to do? What's our purpose as an organisation? Because if we're going to thrive rather than exist, it's important that we deliver into that. But then if we're trying to attach our people to it and engage them in it, we need to give them some voice around understanding the challenges we face and why we might need them to be in 1 or 2 days, but looking at when those days are and how that's going to suit their working pattern. And it's really important to note that we all experience working from home differently. For some, it's great. It's actually a preferred way of working. But I'd probably say that even the person who enjoys it the most will probably value some time with their colleagues to a degree. For others who are at the other end of the spectrum, it is tricky, it is challenging, and we go for that more office-based environment because we enjoy that. But even that person likes a little bit of quiet time just to collate their thinking at times. So there is a blend to be had. But I think the key, if we're going to use engagement in this way, is to set out the objective we're trying to achieve and then give people a voice in terms of how we move towards it.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And perhaps Gareth might have, because we had another sort of similar question really, in the sense that if a workplace is closed, say to the end of the year, but open for those colleagues that are struggling, they're not having a great working remotely experience, yeah, struggling to work from home, can a line manager request that some people come into the office, or all of the team come into the office for 2 or 3 hour meetings when they've specifically asked to continue working from home? And like I say, I think that's possibly also a question for Gareth in a way.
I'm happy to take it first, Sarah. Gareth speaking here. So from an employment law perspective, I suppose it's the boundaries that you have set and the contract you've come with your employees as to the extent to which working from home is the new normal, or is still a response to the current challenges around COVID-19 and working our way out of lockdown. So I would expect that you can generally require people to come into the office and request their attendance. That was their workplace before this all started. I think the key in terms of then dealing with it is dealing with what the objections are. If there are objections to it, are they health-based objections? Are they childcare objections? Are they timing? What are someone's objections to then coming in the office for that reason? And obviously there's a number of different solutions to that around what you've done to make the office COVID safe in terms of a health and safety assessment and working through how you've communicated that, how you've reassured people, but also then on a day-to-day basis, how you've dealt with the flexibility and some of the discretionary effort that you've been harnessing and keeping that dialogue going in relation to how you come about that. So I think ultimately it probably is reasonably to require someone to come in, but you really need to deal on a case-by-case basis any objections you get as to whether you then think there's a conduct issue or a performance issue or something wider that you need to have a conversation about.
Graham, do you have anything?
I think the only thing I would add, and always cautious the sort of legal has to set precedence, is with any process you put in place, I think if people are going to buy into it, they want to have confidence of two things. One, they understand how the evaluation is going to be made, that's clear and they can see that, and then they feel that it's administered fairly. So it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody gets the same outcome, because people's circumstances might be different. But if you plug the same numbers into the computer, then they understand how the answer they get. And I think if people have confidence in that, people have set out, these are the processes and procedures that we're working to, this is how you would then start to talk about it, and they're comfortable, that's very open, it's very clear what those guidelines are, and they feel it's then going to be administered fairly, so anybody in the same set of circumstances would get the same options available to them. I think that's where you really start to build confidence. And it comes back to that cultural integrity. I feel like, we're doing things the way I would hope we do things around here. I also, probably just one point to have from a motivational side of things is that just as human beings, we the worst form of motivation we can ever have is being told to do something. We want to feel like we're choosing to do something. So I think, again, the more we can engage with our people and have dialogue that just gets them to that point where actually I'm electing to do this, and it doesn't mean I'm not overcoming reservations, I want to be sure on those, the more motivated, engaged, and more productive they're going to be as and when and if they may come back into the office as well.
It's interesting. One of the comments that's come through as you're speaking, Graham, is around maybe what the fear is in terms of wanting to go into or not wanting to go into an office, and whether, for example, it's around travel arrangements. They can be largely outside an employer's control. And obviously in denser cities, you can see reliance on public transport is still a concern. So again, I would suggest that in relation to the answers to that, it's thinking creatively about whether you need people in the office, back to what Caitlin was saying at the beginning about what's essential and how you get people to travel, and are there different ways of facilitating someone getting into the office, or where you host your meeting? Does it have to be in the actual office, or can it be somewhere else? But again, it comes down to a case-by-case thing then, doesn't it, as to what that person's objection is and what their needs are, and trying to get a balance.
Okay, well, I don't think we've got any further questions coming in just at the moment, Graham, if you wanted to pick up.
Yeah, sure. Well, okay. So in a way, that draws me through a lot of what I wanted to cover off today. Engagement is a huge topic. We could have filled the day with it. We had the time and the inclination. But what I wanted to really set out, as I say in the first half, is I think engagement is an important consideration at any time, but I think it's absolutely key right now, because if we are engaging our people, we have the chance to take advantage of that wide range of commercial and cultural impacts that are going to be key to helping us bounce back. But if I could give people one piece of advice or one thing to take away from today's session, it would just to always think back to those 4 pillars about how we do things, because we are in quite a fast moving world right now. We are faced with new and novel challenges. on a weekly, sometimes daily basis. And I think we need to manage our own expectations and let ourselves off the hook and think in terms of what we do. We might not always get that right or get that right first time out. But if we're thinking about how we do it, and if we're trying to be clear on our vision and strategy of what we're trying to achieve and how, and we're trying to be engaging when we do it and see our people as you know, as individuals and look at the personal as well as the professional. If we're trying to give them voice where we can do around the ideas that we're putting in place and the reservations they may have, and we're doing it with cultural integrity, then whatever ideas we introduce, we're always going to give them the best possible chance of succeeding. And we're always going to give our organisations the best chance of experiencing those knock-on benefits. And we're always going to give ourselves the best chance of increasing performance and finding a way to thrive in the new normal, whatever that new normal looks like for all of us. So thank you for your questions and comments so far. I'm more than happy to take any others that may now be coming through.
Graham, I had a question. We're getting asked quite well, increasingly by our clients about redundancy and restructuring, and some businesses unfortunately are going to have to be thinking along those lines. That inevitably is going to have an impact on staff morale, even for those staff that perhaps aren't directly at risk of redundancy.
Yeah.
How can leaders and businesses more generally sort of navigate their way through that sort of difficult organisational change, I suppose, in terms of it not impacting too negatively on any discretionary effort you've harnessed, or really stopping or lessening staff engagement?
Yeah, it is difficult. I mean, it comes under the broad banner of change, which, you know, alongside engagement is another huge topic in a way. But there are, you know, I suppose there are some golden rules that I tend to sort of mention to leaders as a bit of a catch-all when we're looking at change. And the first one is that always remember that change is a process. It's not your purpose. And it's really key as an organisation, you understand what your purpose is, what you're here to do, what your vision is, and you keep communicating that to your people. But because if you're looking at that situation whereby, sadly, we're having to look at restructuring organisations, and let's call that how it is, we are going to have to say goodbye to people. Let's make sure that we're reminding people that we're not just doing this as an exercise. It's so that we, you know, it's because we're trying to stay as true to our purpose as we can do. So they can see the reason for it. It doesn't make it any less palatable, or make it any more palatable, sorry, but they understand why it's happening. I think the key then is to understand that when we're going into things like that, change is about people as well as process, and this really brings the values element back into it. That people, I think sometimes, again, we that stakeholder voice, we sometimes forget that people can be part of the solution, not part of the problem, and they see what's going on. Sometimes they see better what's going on because they're at the coalface in their industry every day, and they know, you know, they know that the business isn't where it used to be, or they know that things aren't how they are. So they understand that things need to be done and what that might mean. So I think for them, it's then key that we are doing it in the right way. So that we're doing, you know, that where these decisions have to be taken, that all the values that we put in place and that cultural integrity is being adhered to, so that we wouldn't want it to happen, but actually, if it's going to happen, you know, I'd like it to happen in that particular way. So there's a fairness about it, as we alluded to before with the working from home. And I think then that we have to sort of see that the change is it's about progress. Sadly, it's not about perfection. So it's just how can we make our organisations a bit more fit for purpose tomorrow? And this is hopefully what we're doing. We're trying to move it through now and navigate this so that we're in a position to maintain performance as much as we can do. And that is cultural as well as commercial performance. That's looking after our people as well as looking after the finances. And speaking from personal experience, I think it's really important from leaders to make sure they navigate the challenge when they're going through times like now. And I refer back to 2008 with my own personal experience, and just keep communicating with their people that understanding that you're going through a lot of this while you work for this organisation, hopefully not because you work for this organisation. And I think if you can conduct yourselves well, they'll understand that. They'll understand that this is a wider world issue that's caused a lot of this. But they'll understand that better if you're dealing with it in the right way and you're clear on where you're trying to go, and you know, they feel like the values and the culture are flowing through the way in which you're navigating it.
Thank you, Graham. I also had a question for Gareth, if that's all right, just because I feel like it would be useful to have a bit of a reminder for everyone around furlough more generally, and what the current rules and arrangements are for staff.
Yes, thanks, Sarah. I suppose it's tangential to this, isn't it? Because it's part of that ongoing dialogue. You may still have people on furlough where you've agreed that they won't work, or they'll be on a flex furlough arrangements. Obviously, those can continue at the moment. The scheme comes to an end at the end of October, 31st of October, and we're in the September, where there's an element of tapering, and there's further tapering coming in October as well. So at the moment, the government's going to pay 70% of wages, with 10% being paid by the employer, and that goes down to 60%, with 20% being paid by the employer, together with NI and pension in October. So I think Graham talks about engagement and talks about clarity with workforces and aligning back to culture and purpose. I think that also comes with your workforce planning decisions, in terms of being very clear about your reasons if you need to have a redundancy situation, both in terms of risk management, to be clear it is a redundancy situation and not something else that you're trying to address, but also that is clearly communicated, and quite often the success of a process both around furlough, in terms of getting engagement to people to agree furlough or to come back on a flex basis or back into the workplace, and also those workforce planning discussions, is underpinned largely by communication and just being very clear about why you're doing something and what the business purposes are behind it.
Thanks, Gareth. We've got another question here. It's for you. Are you able to just briefly give your views on staff who've been working abroad due to COVID and ill health, but now are not willing to come back? The organisation doesn't encourage remote working.
I think if you want people to be back in the workplace, and that's generally the accepted approach that you're doing as a business, and there are good reasons to be there, then you just need to work through someone's objections to that. If they are health related, then obviously the disability discrimination issues may well come to play as to why it is that they need adjustments to maybe facilitate them continuing to work, which involves a level of home working. And I think the other area is around health and safety in terms of the employment law context. If people are still concerned about the working environment and the level of health and safety in there, then obviously there's lots of government guidance about what you're expected to do in terms of publishing a risk assessment and then keeping that updated and to communicate with staff. But bear in mind the framework that sits behind that. If an employee asserts health and safety as one of their reasons for not wanting to come back, as to they're triggering a level of protection, which may relate to both detriment whilst they carry on employment, and also contribute to the fairness of a dismissal if termination of employment arises. So again, I think it's it's key to get into the detail of why someone is reluctant to come back in the first place. Is it, I say, if it's health, then is it reasonable adjustments can be made to facilitate home working, office working, but is there an element of home working to facilitate that as well, and therefore you're dealing with that person individually because of their conditions. And if they're going through the health and safety issues and working through the plan, and again working through whether you need to do any additional risk assessments in response to what that individual is saying. So there's quite a lot of work to do there, but I think if you work through those issues, you then get to a sensible place as to whether you can then insist on that person coming in, and then if there's a reasonable objection after that, is that then becoming a conduct issue or performance issue, or is there more to do in terms of a dialogue to get that person into a better place in terms of what you want them to do.
And then we've got a sort of more sort of general question that I think is probably more for Graham, and this is around those individuals who are kind of now in the swing of it and in the habit of working remotely, and they're sort of enjoying that way of working, and then sort of becoming less and less willing to sort of engage with a team or with their colleagues, because they see this, you know, this is what it's going to be like now. This is the long-term kind of pattern that we're going to have going forwards. And how do you, I suppose, maintain or make sure you are giving a message that actually we're sort of, this is, I guess, a sort of, it's a new normal, but this is not our optimum way of working. We don't want everybody to think that you're just working on your own now, and you know, we don't have to engage in the same way.
Yeah, I think it may just be an interesting choice of word, but it sort of comes back to that initial definition around engagement. You use the word they're enjoying working from home, and you would want people to enjoy their working life. You would want them to find it fulfilling. But what you also want to make sure that is it's productive. So actually, I may be happy, I'm great, I'm not commuting, etc. But am I still, you know, am I still contributing what I need to the organisation so that it's achieving its aims as well? And I think this is where it's really important at every level, be it organisation, be it at line manager level, that we set quite clear expectations. And that's normally what's changed in these instances. So we talked before about, you know, the outcomes that we're looking to work towards, and people managing their working days around that. And I think when we're performance managing now, we need to be clear in that, okay, let's look at individuals about what we're expected to do and why, but let's look beyond that as well. So it's not just about your individual role. We all, you know, we used to contribute, we had team meetings, there are things that we did collectively. How can we replicate that? Because we still need the benefits of that, and we still, you know, we still need you to contribute to that. And one of the I suppose the trickier areas lots of organisations are trying to get to grips with at the moment is, how do we still put in place those slightly less transactional, that spontaneous innovation where you hear somebody talking about that development of people, where you see somebody do something in a particular way, and you know, you suddenly realise that's something that you could incorporate. So it's the softer areas as well. But I think it all starts with just setting down clear expectations that everybody needs to work to. So it's not placed on a particular individual. I always call it a centre line. If we're in this team, the centre line of what we do, culturally, commercially, operationally, it's this. And we need everybody to live to that. And so if anybody steps away from that centre line and have the dialogue around what that line looks like, then we need to have a conversation about just bringing people back in line. And that, yes, that's about your individual contribution, but it's about being a team member and contributing what the organisation needs as well.
Sarah, I was just going to say, in terms of workplaces where people are starting to get some staff back in, perhaps everybody's coming in, or perhaps some people are coming in, and there is definitely a shift from having worked, you know, very much on our own at home, and that's quite different potentially to then going back and working in a team, that there's probably a place for some sort of reinduction program for assessing how people are. People may well have had some real challenges around working at home. Their well-being might not be quite where they want to be. They might have real fears around some aspects of coming back into work, and there may absolutely need to be a period of readjustment to working in a different way and working as part of a team. And I think we've got to be realistic about the fact that it isn't just going to slot into place automatically when they're straight back in the office as of day one.
I think it's an interesting point. There's a couple of organisations I've worked with who said, we are now, you know, let us know if you would prefer to work in the office, and we'll start to look at the risk assessment and why you do it. And the take up was about 15 to 20%, because working from home, I think, is something that we all experience individually. And it's a contrast really between what was the old working environment in the office and how well did we get on with that, and what's our likely working environment at home and how well do we get on with that, and how do we transition between the two. For some, it's been great, and we hear an awful lot about the reduced commute and greater flexibility, but for some it's a challenge, and so some people do want that. We just need to be mindful of, you know, why would somebody be experiencing challenges in either one of those two settings, and how can we work with them to look at what they need as an individual, but all the time also have one eye on what the organisation needs, because that's the word of it today really. That's making sure that we thrive in the new normal, and we're not just, you know, working from home, we're working at home, we're working from home and being productive as well.
Yeah, we had one comment come in from somebody saying they really like the 4 pillars model. Thank you very much. Um,
I can't claim to own that. It's out there, but I'll take 2 minutes of glory.
we had another question, which is again probably one for Gareth, possibly slightly off topic, but I shall go with it. If somebody is isolating and they're waiting for a COVID test, either for themselves or someone in their household, if that person can't work from home because their role doesn't allow it and they have no annual leave to take, are companies offering SSP, unpaid leave, or something else?
It's an interesting conundrum, isn't there? I would say I think the starting point is to understand whether that person themselves is unwell, because it may well be that obviously the SSP qualifying criteria have been reviewed in response to COVID, and there are various regulations. So I'd certainly double check those as to whether, if they're advised to self-isolate, that's equivalent to a sick note and they're entitled to at least SSP. If they're not entitled to that and they don't have any annual leave and they can't otherwise work, I think you probably are in an unpaid leave situation in relation to that. And I think what probably underpins that, and it may well be it's an ongoing problem for all of us as employers, is what do your absence and leave policies say? Do people understand that is, back to what Graham was saying, that you've got a centre line and everyone's going to be treated in the same way? These are the principles by which the company is going to deal with absence in those circumstances, so people don't feel unfairly treated or singled out for particular treatment. So I would review your emergency leave and your absence policies just to make sure it's clear that if certain circumstances arise, there is a possibility that there will be unpaid leave is the only solution left for an organisation.
Thanks, Gareth. We had another comment come in to say, and this sort of feeds into what Caitlin was saying about sort of reinduction, but this comment is around the organisation beginning to think about doing individual risk assessments. So a lot of employers have had to think about doing a sort of broader health and safety risk assessment to make sure their workplace is COVID safe. But I suppose this is more focusing around going to individual sort of staff members, thinking about their particular set of circumstances and risk assessing that. Have any of you seen employers start to use that strategy?
I think it is an ongoing obligation for an employer to obviously ensure there's a safe working environment and safe place to work. So if concerns are being raised, it's as much about home working as it is about office working, that there is some form of assessment that goes with the issue that's being addressed. And then certainly I would suggest that it is a sensible thing to do. When you talk about health and safety risk assessment, it can sound like quite a large involved process, but I think you just need to boil it down to the absolute core of what it is that you're looking to address. You've obviously got the background of the organisational thinking already, and it's just how you then need to review or tweak that to reflect the individual challenge that you're then looking at. So I think it's useful then to document that, whether you're calling it a full health and safety risk assessment or whether you're using it as part of taking the principles from that and using it as part of the dialogue. Clearly will depend on the situation and your organisation and how you tackle those issues.
Thanks, Gareth. Did anybody have any other questions that they wanted to ask? There's nothing open at the moment that I can see, but if anyone's got any they want to put forward, or if anyone from the panel's got any further comments.
I suppose if I was coming back to the topic of engagements, mention a few things to leave people with, and the risk of sounding a little bit sort of similar to the WHO and what we're all going through at this moment. But I think it can sometimes seem counterintuitive at this moment in time to think about, are we going to test our engagement levels at this moment in time? Are we going to run a survey? And I think now is a really optimum time to do it. So I was going to give people any particular advice to sort of go away, what one thing can I go back? And whether it's formally or informally, if it's been a while since you've actually run an engagement survey or staff survey or whatever you tend to do on a year-to-year basis, think about now as a good time to do it, because I do get a sense we're moving into new chapters on all this, and it'd be very, very good to get that landscape so you know where you're building from as well. So probably be my sort of parting comment.
So would that be your sort of one takeaway, do you think, Graham, if you had to say, okay, to a business that perhaps is wondering sort of where to start and how to kind of maximize their staff engagement, is that a good place to start?
I think it can seem quite counterintuitive because we're working remotely, and so engaged remotely, sometimes takes a second or two to compute. But I do feel that as we're starting to look at thriving in a new normal, and actually we're going to settle into this, we're going to need to find ways of working. I think it's a very useful exercise because at the very least it lets organisations know what they're looking at. And it lets them know where they're succeeding, whether that is certain areas, departments, or certain facets of their engagement strategy. And it also lets them know where they maybe can focus some attention, bringing this, how they dedicate resource around it. So I would say if it's something that you regularly do, and it's something that you've maybe not done because was it a priority during the last 6 months, I'd suggest that you think about doing one, however light touch or forensic you might want to be. I leave that with you, but I think it's worth doing one because it'll let you know exactly where you are right now, and that's a really great platform for how you might want to move forward.
Okay, we've had a couple of other questions. There's a bit of an overlap here that people have asked about employees who are working abroad and how long that is sort of acceptable in terms of the workplace and the employer. I mean, my feeling is that it's going to depend very much on the sort of the organisation and what their requirements are and what their needs are. Does anyone have any particular views or comments or thoughts on remote working where the employee has been working abroad rather than in the UK? Gareth, I think you might have a bit of personal experience of this.
A little bit, maybe, yes. But I think more widely, I think as you say, it comes down, if the job can still be done and there are no immigration or other issues, then, and you're happy that person's engaged and is getting stuff done, then obviously you may want to continue with that. You probably need to be careful that you're not in any way signaling it's a permanent change, if that's not what you want to agree. So carrying on being a flexible event, and that you maybe keep it under a review period. So do you review it monthly with that individual check-in just to see whether it needs to continue or whether they should be coming back? I think if there are operational things that you want to address and it's better that they are in the UK, then I think you start to talk to the individual about that. Ultimately, in any employment relationship, you have an obligation to act reasonably. So if they've gone with your blessing, but you now want them back and they can't get back in a hurry, you probably have to agree what's a reasonable timescale for them to return, and then navigate any quarantine or other issues depending upon where they're based in terms of when they come back into the UK. So I would say you need to be clear it's still a flexible temporary arrangement, that you haven't agreed to anything more permanent than that unless you want to, and that you then probably have a program to keep it under review, and then bear in mind that when you want that person back, you probably need to act reasonably in terms of how quickly you can insist they're back, and then obviously allow therefore time to deal with any logistics of getting back into the UK, and deal with it in that way.
Okay, I had a question about the webinar that the employment team is running on the 30th of September, and invites for that. Perhaps that's something that we can put up on a follow-up to today's session, just in terms of if people are interested in attending that webinar, how they would go about booking onto it. Sure.
I think it will follow the mailing list for this is one of the mailing lists that will probably receive the invitation. So I think the invitation will come out from our events team. If anyone doesn't get it and they would like it, then of course please get in touch and we'll make sure that you get the invitation.
Okay, thanks. So I think that is all the questions that we've currently got up. So unless anybody else has got anything to ask, I can probably hand over to Graham for his sort of closing comments or thoughts.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. I mean, it really, I think, comes back to what I was saying earlier on. I think engagement is a relevant consideration for organisation at any particular time, but I do think it's particularly relevant right now as we talk about, finding new ways of working and building back and thriving in the new normal, because the challenges that we face are both, yes, they're on a commercial front, but there are lots of cultural issues that we face as well. And there are issues related to our customers that we face as well. And the questions over the last 5 minutes have outlined that quite clearly. And so I do think that if we're looking at engagement, it's a key thing to do. And I'd always bring people back to, as somebody mentioned, those 4 pillars in a way. If we're going about things in the right way, whatever those initiatives are, that I think is always going to give any organisation the best chance of engaging our people around the ideas that we put in place and taking advantage of that discretionary effort, which can, and does have a huge impact on performance in so many ways.
Thank you very much, Graham. Thank you, Gareth and Sarah, and thank you all for listening today. We have mentioned, there will be a follow-up. You will have a recording of this and also notification of the events that we've talked about. And please feel free to contact any of us if you have any particular questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.